when she advertised, oops. Hello, my dance friends, and welcome to my channel. Today I get to chat with the beautiful Liz Azi. Liz is a talented dance artist specializing in Raqs Sharqi and Transnational Fusion. She's based out of Denver, Colorado. She has an anthropology background and takes this approach to her dancing, focusing on history, culture, and contextualization to inform her movement. Liz did a lot of research for a thesis project that she had published just a few years ago called Bellydance in the United States, Cultural Productions of Alternative Health Narratives and Practices. I was super thrilled when she notified the community that she was offering this publication, and I really wanted to chat with her about the research process, who she interviewed, what motivated the research in the first place, and what her conclusions were, as well as what information she might add into this project if she were doing it today. So without further ado, here's Liz.
Hey!
Thanks for coming to visit with me today. I know a lot of people are super excited about your thesis project. That was just from a couple of years ago, right? That got published.
2017. So that means I did the bulk of the research in 2016. So it has been a little while.
Can you tell us a little bit about your research and the conclusions that you found within your research from that project?
I was in a department that was medical anthropology for a master's program. And first and foremost, what medical anthropology is. I feel like most folks are really familiar with anthropology and not so much medical anthropology, but it's really studying cultures of healthcare and cultures of medical systems. It's really easy for lots of folks to think that these are kind of these really objective structures, and really, so much of that is cultural, just like everything else in life. First, I did a big deep dive into, this dance form, kind of what is in America typically called belly dance, in other places in the world, Raqs Sharqi, there's a few other names. So I did a deep dive into how that dance came to America and some of the histories behind that, as well as, I guess, a lot of the advertising and almost propaganda that happened around the time where this dance came into the country, and a little bit into how some of that advertising became adopted as history, with big quotes, and kind of trying to tease out what was actually history and what was kind of fantasy history that's kind of become part of our common ethos is what we think is part of this dance. And then I kind of did a modern research project where I interviewed a handful of folks who were at the time all making most of their living off of this dance form as professional dancers who were biologically female and presenting themselves in social situations and in medical situations as women. And I looked at how participating in this dance form as a profession influenced how they thought about their bodies, and therefore influenced kind of how they related to Western medicine. And what was kind of one of the most interesting findings is almost everyone I spoke to, even though all of them are living in this country, all of them are, had pretty decent access to Western medicine, I think as good of access as any of us have, there is a pretty wide rejection of Western medicine by the people I talked to. There was this deep embedded culture of kind of taking care of yourself and taking care of those around you and sharing medical knowledge with each other, kind of self-diagnosing, self-treating. And one of the biggest findings that I kind of tied it into is I felt like there was so much in the interviews that I did where folks were really kind of obsessed with this concept of control of the body. And they talked about it in the sense of that this dance form gave them that feeling. And so, not to get kind of too academically theoretical, but one of the big tenets of Western biomedicine is, when you're a patient, you kind of relinquish that control and you relinquish that knowledge of your body to physicians. As opposed to holistic forms of treatment, you kind of have much more of a bi-directional conversation and ownership of your body with the practitioner to kind of figure out a treatment. What's so funny, I ended my thesis of, so why do we even care? Why do we even care about if a whole bunch of women are just kind of not queuing into Western medicine? And I think one of the overall reasons why I think it's really interesting is that even though, all of these women identified as American or had at least American as part of their identity, they should be the population that are being served by Western medicine, yet there's like this total rejection of it. I think partially because of gender, partially because of socioeconomics, but also partially because they were dancers. And that was, really interesting to kind of dive into.
So what compelled you to do this as your research project specifically?
I would love to say that that's exactly what I wanted to do as soon as I started. But I actually kind of fell into it. So my undergraduate degree was in also cultural anthropology, and I was trying to specialize in Middle Eastern history and politics. And then the timing of it, my senior year in undergraduate, the Arab Spring happened. And so my professors and advisors at that time very strongly felt that if I wanted to be accepted into grad school, I needed to shift that, because they were worried that given the political context and, at the time the Arab Spring was just happening, I feel like there was a lot of uncertainty. So they did not feel confident that I could be accepted into a graduate program with funding, particularly as, a white woman trying to study cultures and histories where there's, a lot of political unrest. So I quickly switched to something else. And then when I was looking at graduate programs, I found this one professor who did a lot of work into ritual dance medicine. And I want to define ritual because I feel like, a lot of Westerners kind of have a lot of baggage with that word, but it really, in the context of anthropology, it's just meaning when there's kind of predefined rules and situations and meanings that you would use it for. So I was really interested in, doing some cultural anthropology with dance as medicine. So got into that program, moved across the country, and then that professor rapidly left the department.
Of course.
So I was in this situation that, I was kind of then on my own in the department. No one in the department studied dance at all. It was still a medical anthropology program. And then there is a general trend of academia kind of losing funding. So I also had to make a research project with no funding. I had to conduct research that I could afford to make happen. So I thought it long and hard about what I was interested in and then what communities I had access to. And I was like, hey, here's a dance community I have access to. Lots of folks know me. Lots of folks, even if they don't know me, there's kind of that mutual trust that dancers have for each other because, like it or not, we're in kind of a small-ish bubble. I originally was interested in trying to kind of dive more into history, but my department pushed me into doing a little bit more of a current academic study. And then this happened. I honestly just kind of started talking to dancers and asking them tons and tons of questions. Really kind of the arguments that I ended up making in my thesis, they came well after I talked to folks. I wasn't quite thinking about this when I started my interviews.
Was there anything that culminated in your research or conclusions that kind of surprised you, or was it kind of what you expected it to be?
There's actually a lot when you dive into this dance in American history, particularly, that can be really surprising, and I think for some people can almost be upsetting. There's a lot of things that are commonly taught as part of this dance's history that when you really trace it back aren't necessarily history and are more people's interpretations of performances that they are seeing, what they're either not quite understanding the cultural context of what they're watching, or they might have their own agendas. Oftentimes there's kind of different motives for how people are writing. As far as the other piece, the health research that I did, I kind of had this preconceived notion that, once I heard that dancers were widely kind of rejecting Western medicine, that it would be based on because there was a stigma about being a belly dancer. And while a few dancers talked about that, that really wasn't a ubiquitous theme that I found. And it really kind of like their reasons ran much deeper. One of the things I wanted to do for my research was I really wanted to go to a lot of these festivals and kind of do what's in anthropology called participant observation. Which is a fancy way of saying just being immersed in the situation you're researching. Because I have anecdotally noticed before my research at these kind of national and international festivals, there's so much of this rhetoric about what supplements people are taking, what herbs people are taking, how to almost like biohack into your body to kind of amp up your performance ability or your ability to travel and stay up all night and have no sleep and still be a great performer. And so I wasn't able to go just based on timing and funding to any of those festivals during the official period of my research, but after, I've of course been to quite a few. And yeah, I hear that rhetoric all the time. I think one of the biggest things that would have to be updated by every single one of my findings is, I think honestly, COVID has completely changed. It's going to leave really lasting impacts on how people relate to healthcare and relate to their bodies and relate to whatever medical system they have access to. And it might be a really long time before we really understand kind of what that cultural impact is.
It's a game changer. It's like an overhaul for our lifestyle for sure.
Yeah, knowing that this is a global situation, it's really humbling to be alive and be a witness to this right now. And I don't think anyone can really predict what life is going to be like a year from now, 5 years from now. What are we going to look like as a society? What's dance? What is the dance community going to look like? It's anyone's guess.
Well, COVID aside, was there anything that you would change about your research now, like the people interviewed, the groupings that were included in your research, anything like that you would maybe alter now if you were doing it today?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things that I would change looking back is kind of how I recruited people, which ended up really limiting who I talked to. I had a super short amount of time to do this. And so my way of recruiting was I posted a few ads on some online belly dance groups and just took whoever would talk to me. A few kind of notes about who I included and who I didn't include. I intentionally did not include anyone who identified as either male, masculine, trans, or at the time non-binary, only because, as several folks have already written about and written really beautiful papers, especially in this dance community, they are really prominent individuals, and I didn't feel confident in my ability with my resources at the time to include their stories while still remaining anonymous, and also calling out that individuals who fit those categories, have very different health challenges than women. One thing in anthropology is you actually try not to get too broad and you want to look at really particular intersections because those intersections in identity really matter. If I could have talked to lots and lots and lots of folks to where I could have kept everyone anonymous, I would have loved to include their stories. But there's other authors who have written extensively about male, masculine, trans, and non-binary dancers, both in the Middle East and the United States. There's Anthony Shea. There's an individual who I always mispronounce his name, and I feel terrible that I always mispronounce it, but it's Stavros.
Oh, yes.
I have his book, and it's wonderful, and I always mess up his name. But then there's also, contemporary dancers in our scene now, Kamra and Grayson Von Trapp. They've written extensively about these, different intersections in identity and how that impacts being a dancer. And the other identity that I was not able to include, I had no Black dancers respond, and I think there's a few reasons. I think, the larger community is realizing that some of those online belly dance groups are maybe not as safe of a place for everyone as we've previously thought. I wasn't compensating anybody because I was a broke grad student. There's also, the United States has kind of a really troubling history of how biomedicine has treated particular communities of color, particularly Black women. So there is, so much more context and history behind their experiences and how they relate. I did pick out, if anyone watching this is super interested, there is an author, Kiara Briggs, called Reproducing Race. It's a wonderful book, and it details the really terrible history that our country has with our medical system and Black female bodies, particularly with reproductive justice. If I could go back, I would do a lot better recruitment. I would, if I could magically poof money into the air, be able to pay my participants, and I think just spend a lot more time interviewing folks and interviewing a lot more people.
Well, thank you for that resource. I'll add that to the description below the video. Liz, thank you so much for joining me today and for chatting with me. I know everyone's super excited to hear about your paper.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I always love nerding out about dance.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it, guys. I'll be linking all of Liz's information below so you can catch up on what she's doing, her dance projects, workshops, classes, as well as how to get your hands on that thesis if you'd like to read it yourself. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out a lot, and I'd love to keep making videos like this for you. This week's Patreon shout out is to Jackie Zarka from right here in Texas. Thanks for joining me today, guys. Let's look at this.